Welcome to the March the 4th, 1997 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie. We're very excited that you're in our viewing audience, and we have a very special gentleman that we're interviewing today as we establish the history of Grand Prairie, Texas, and some of the people that made that history. And we're just so pleased that this is our history tape number 300. And it is a very exciting number for us to reach interview number 300. And so we've chosen a very special man today that is a long-time Grand Prairian to be our interview with today. Mr. Edward F. Jones, welcome to the set.
Thank you.
Mr. Ed, it is so good to have you with us. And I know the viewing audience is going to be excited as we talk and you unfold your life here on our station. And would you look out into your camera right over here and let's talk about the real Ed Jones and establish your genealogy. Tell us a little bit about your parents, what they did for a living, where they lived, and anything you'd like to say about them.
My parents married in Ennis, Texas, and I was later born in Mahia, Texas. We moved to Dallas shortly thereafter, and I spent rest of my life in the Dallas Oak Cliff area, except for the last 40 years here in Grand Prairie. My daddy was a railroad man and mother was a housewife. And we always had a great crowd around there, having a band and minstrels and stuff. Had a good childhood.
All right, now give us his full name and then give us your mother's full name.
Hardy Hugh Jones, and her name was Catherine with a K, Beatrice Jones. She was formerly a Smith.
Okay. And growing up in the East Texas area, did you grow up down
No,
in the Piney Woods?
We came to Dallas when I was just a small child.
All right.
I spent a great deal of time with my grandparents down in Ennis.
All right.
Back right after I graduated from high school in Sunset, January 1931. And jobs was awfully scarce. In fact, you couldn't find a job except delivering circulars or being a soda jerker, they called them, or this, that, caddying on the golf course. And of course, I did all that sort of thing. I've been a bellhop, and sorry to say I was a bartender and a short order cook, and I worked in a laundry, and I worked in an ice cream factory. I've been an investigator for the government. I've been an appraiser, and just all sorts of challenging jobs that I've had.
All right, if you moved, when your parents moved from Ennis to Dallas, what elementary school did you attend in Dallas?
I went to John Brown for one semester over in Dallas.
All right.
At kindergarten.
All right.
And then we moved to Oak Cliff in September 1919.
All right.
So I went to kindergarten again.
All right.
And so I spent all my years in Winnetka School.
Winnetka, okay.
And then in 1927, I went to Sunset and graduated from there in January of 31.
1931. When you were going to Sunset High School and you became a bison, full-fledged, do you remember who was principal or any of your teachers?
Jack Jack Wilson was the principal there. And Miss Durrett was the head mistress.
She was the dean. Miss Durrett, Virginia Durrett was the dean, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she was something else. She kept everything under control, I'm sure.
Oh, she really did. She was tough. Yes. All right, do you have any other special teachers that you remember at Sunset?
Oh, Mr. Lyons, a math teacher, was a great instructor, and Mr. Carmichael was a music director. He was great. Right. I had the privilege of going to reunion, 50th reunion at Sunset a few years back. Incidentally, this past January was our 66th anniversary of graduating.
66th one, in 1956. All right.
But we got to see Mr. Michaels, and some of the other teachers were still living, and he looked very youthful. He was a great person.
Oh, that is wonderful. Well, were you in the band at Sunset?
No, I never did play in the band, and I wasn't big enough to play athletics. When I got out of school and I weighed about 130 pounds.
All right, was there any special subjects that you liked really well at Sunset High School?
I was good in mathematics
Uh-huh.
and terrible in English,
Yeah.
which I've always regretted that I didn't apply myself more
Yes.
towards the English end of
All
it.
right. And after Sunset High School, then what happened to Ed Jones?
Well, the Depression was in full gear, and like I said, you couldn't find a job, and until I hunted and fished and did odd job, picked cotton and hoed corn and things like that down at my grandmother's.
All right.
And I finally-
would you like us to have your grandmother's name on this tape?
Yes.
All right, let's.
Her name was Mary Alice, and she learned to read printing so she could read the Bible.
Oh, I see.
She never got to go to school any.
Well, Mary Alice, what was her last name?
Miller was her maiden name,
All right.
and she was a Jones.
She was a
of course.
Jones, of course. Your dad's mother.
And then my other grandmother, Etta West was her farmer name. Her daddy was a general in the Civil War. Her granddaddy. No, her daddy, that's right. And my grandmother lived to be 99, and she never remarried after that and lived with all of us people from time to time.
Oh, that was
And my
wonderful.
grandmother, my mother's mother, lived to be 98. So on my mother's side, it's a long-lived family. I hope I keep continuing on.
Yes, that is wonderful. All right, and then during the war years, what did you do?
Well, I volunteered for the Navy, and a couple of years later, I volunteered for submarine service. And I spent the last 2.5 years in submarines.
All right, now tell us when you went into the Navy, where did you do your training?
I went to Norfolk, Virginia, on January the 12th, 1942, and boot camp, they called it.
Yes,
And then later I was sent to Philadelphia for a short while, and then I was scheduled to go aboard the Ingram, a destroyer, making the Murmansk run to Russia, and it got sunk coming into Boston, so I never did go aboard it.
Yes.
And I spent some time in what they call ship's company, I was a secretary, a yeoman they called it. Oh, and then I got submarine school, and then I've been in a lot of places, done a
All
lot.
right, submarine school, tell us about that. Was that exciting?
Yes, it was. It was a real challenge. I know I got there on Christmas Eve in 1943.
Was that where? In Connecticut?
New London, Connecticut, yes.
In Connecticut,
right out of
okay.
Hartford there.
All right.
And it's 17 below zero when I got off the train, and I didn't have any winter clothes because I'd been living on the beach, they called it, as in an apartment.
Yes.
And I'd thrown away all my winter underwear and mittens and things like that, and I wired Dad to get them. The telegram got fouled up, and I didn't get them for about a week. And out there doing those monkey exercises at 4 o'clock in the morning, 10 below zero, snowing. It's quite an experience. And first submarine I went down on, I thought, my Lord, what have I got myself into?
Were you assigned to a submarine, and your first assignment was what?
My first assignment was in Panama, in the squadron there. And I spent, better part of a year in the squadron. What we did in Panama, the submarines that come through the Panama Canal going to the West Pacific,
Yes.
they'd shake them down, they call it. They'd test ride and have target practice. And if they needed any personnel, somebody gets sick or hurt or what died or whatever, we put somebody else on board. We had trained personnel there, and
Yes.
we operated with reconnaissance airplanes, PBYs and PBMs, looking for German submarines and all. They were scattered all up and down the East Coast. A lot of people never did know that until after the war was over.
Well, when you got out of the Navy, out of the submarine service, what year was that?
September 1945 was discharged. I
1945.
spent nearly 4 years in
Yes. And where were you discharged from?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Back up in the east.
Yeah,
yes.
back up there again.
All right.
And I got home, and I think I had a dime in my pocket. Didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, didn't have a car, no clothes, no money in the bank. And started over, and Dad said, well, where are you going to live? I said, I don't know. He said, well, that room upstairs where you and your brother were raised is Bacon. If y'all want to move in there, you can find a place.
All right, and so here we find you have a brother.
Yes, my brother passed away about 3 years ago.
Give us his name.
Warren.
Warren. Was he here in this area?
Yes. He was with the Dallas Post Office until he retired.
Yes.
And he has one son and daughter. His son here now is the head of the Wrangler Clothes outfit here. Everything east of the Mississippi River.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Yeah, I guess he takes after my dad. Pretty smart young man.
Oh, that's great. All right, and so you went upstairs to that room that used to belong to the two, and did you stay there for a while?
We stayed there nearly a year, and I finally got an apartment through an old friend of mine.
All right, had you married by this time?
I had been married 6 years when I volunteered to go in the Navy.
In the Navy. Well, we haven't even gotten you married yet, so let's
I got married in November 1936.
November 1936, and tell us this beautiful girl's name while I show the picture.
Helen Janice Jones, and she was 19.
Why don't you hold that up right here so that when they clue in on that, and you can talk about her while you're showing that picture. Just beautiful. Even though you lost her several years ago, we must document this, okay?
Yes, Helen was a beautiful girl, and we were married nearly 60 years.
Nearly
like
60
in 3 months.
Yes.
And
well,
she was she had her 19th birthday a week before we were married.
All right. Well, would you give us her full name and her parents' name?
Her name is Helen Janice Jones.
She was a Brown?
Her daddy was Dan Brown, and her mother was Annie. Her maiden name was Crabtree, her mother was.
Yes.
And then, yeah, we had a great life together. It's gone a lot. And then when the wars came back, I traveled for the federal government and was gone a lot from that time.
Did you all have any children?
We lost a child at birth. Never did have any more.
No more children. Okay, and then Dad said you and Helen can move upstairs in that room, and you did, and then what happened to Mr. Jones?
Well, we finally got I went back to work about 3 months later with the city of Dallas. I had been there before the war, started in the water department, and then I went to the tax department, and then war come along, and I went back there, and then I left, and then I was an appraiser down in Port Arthur for a year. And
is that a real estate appraiser?
Well, we revalued the city of Port Arthur like they revalue the town of Grand Prairie, something which I did later here.
Yes, okay.
And then I took a job as an investigator with the federal government, traveled all over the country, and that lasted a year, and I got tired of traveling. I'd been traveling seemed like part of my life.
Well, was Helen working during this time?
Yes, and she, most of the time. Then she'd come and stay with me from time to time, but we were separated a lot. So I got tired of living out of a suitcase, and I decided to come back, and I went back to the city of Dallas and stayed, and the job was offered to me here in Grand Prairie. Mr. Chenault, Pete Chenault, was the school tax assessor.
All right.
And he had recommended me to them, and I had, of course, 20 years experience in the field. And I came out here, and Dean Dawley was the city manager and hired me, and it was a great challenge. They had a kind of a country store operation, so to speak, in their tax department. They hadn't had trained people, of course, and didn't know. Of course, I grew up in a bigger tax office and knew how to operate all that.
Yes.
But we got it rolling. It worked out very well.
And you were the tax appraiser and collector and everything here in Grand Prairie for how many years?
9.5 years.
9.5 years, okay.
And then
you saw a lot of different city managers come and go then, didn't you?
Well, yes. There's Mr. Dawley, Dean Dawley, and then there's one behind him. Slips my mind for a minute.
Right.
And then
Mr. Cliff Johnson.
Well, and Larry Crow in between.
Yes, that's right.
And Larry was a real fine administrator.
Right.
McCraw was the other one I couldn't think of.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Johnson come along.
All right. Were you still tax collector when Mr. Johnson came along?
Yes, I worked for Cliff, about 2 years, I guess, and then the board, Urban Renewal Board, was in need of a director. Pete Garrett had left and went to work for the
Was Mr.
HUD.
Garrett the first urban renewal director?
No, Windy Hill, Eugene Windy Hill, they called him, was the first one.
First urban
And they
renewal.
started out in the Dalworth area.
All right.
Dean Dawley got a referendum. You had to have an election about it to get it passed, and certain other criteria you had to have be able to have one of those projects funded.
Yes.
So it's then the board hired me to do that, and they hadn't had anybody for a while, and it was growing, and it was some challenge, I want you to know.
Yes.
I never would have thought I could have lasted 14 years. I thought it might last 14 days, but
14 years in urban renewal. I believe my Mr. Jackson was on your board.
yes, he was.
Yes,
Mr. Jackson was there when they hired me. Him and Mr. John Prairie was there and served 20-something years. L.A. Vernon, Thomas Mays, and I don't know, in the Reverend down here at the Baptist Church, he was on there for a while. Oh, I must have had 50 different members of the board from the time I started till it was all over with.
Well, when you went in, did you have an assistant to your job?
Yes, I hired one, Earl Pride. And of course, Earl didn't know any more about it than I did. We just...
Flying by the seat of your britches?
yes, really. But I did know all the people in Grand Prairie, and I was able to talk to them and explain the program to them, and that's what they were needed and looked for at the time.
And you mentioned the first project was in Dalworth, and that's where our real good friend that we recently lost, Mr. David Daniels.
David Daniels, he was the backbone of that area out there, and if it hadn't been for David, the program out there would have never been real successful.
Oh, that's
Same
wonderful.
way when integration come along, he was the prime man that we had very little problem with it. The
Yes.
transition went over very well. David was a real friend of mine.
Yes.
And like myself, he grew up pretty hard, caddying on the golf course and hustling, picking cotton, whatever, try to make a dollar. And then they decided and voted in to do the Lakeview project.
All right.
Oh, brother, I never
That
saw
was a mess, wasn't it?
Had one paved street out there, no water, no sewer, no gas, no sidewalks.
No good
no
streets.
School. No what?
No good streets.
No, they had one paved street, 14th Street was partially paved. And we had it all tore up for 2 winters there, and I thought they'd drive me crazy. We had every record in Grand Prairie pulling people out during the winter when it rained, get them to work and back. And you can imagine some of the irate citizens calling my office. The phones stayed pretty hot there for quite a while, but we finally met the challenge and made it work.
All right, Lakeview, did you have an assistant helping you with that one?
Yes, I had 2 able assistants. Dwayne Young was one of my assistants, and Ray Phillips was the other. And they both did a great job. All of my staff was good, seasoned people. I couldn't have never had the success the agency had without the help of all the employees. They were wonderful people.
After you finished Lakeview, did you stay at Urban Renewal any longer?
No, we finished Lakeview, and then we come downtown in a few other areas that they set out a little, but it wasn't on the basis of what real urban renewal was, because it was a lesser degree of things, more try to help people find housing and put them in apartments. Yes. And things of this nature. We did redo some of the streets and the sewers and water, things of that nature, but it wasn't on the scope of that. So after we finished Lakeview and Dalworth, I decided that I was going to have my 65th birthday in a short while, so
Yes.
I told the board I was going to resign, and I resigned February the 1st, 1978. So I spent 14 years at the helm of that thing.
And then after you retired on that 65th birthday, was Helen still working?
Yes, she worked on for a short while. No, I'll take it back. That's 1978. She retired, took physical disability from Chance Voigt out here. She was the secretary in quality control to Mr. Herman Miners. And she wasn't able to work anymore, and so she had to take physical disability.
Yes. All right. What did you do with your life when you became 65? That's a magic date.
Well, I'd always looked forward to having a place on the lake, and I had a mobile home at Texoma, there in the Elk section, right out of Pottsboro. And I would go up there and stay a while, and maybe Helen would go one time, and then her sister lived with us the last 20 years of her life, and sometimes they wanted to go, and sometimes they didn't, and I would go, and me and my old partner that I worked, that was my assistant boss in Dallas, he was my partner in the mobile home up there.
Yes. Would you like to name him?
Clarence Parrish, yes, he was a great person. Clarence was 18 years older than I was, but I don't know, I worked with him a lot of years over there, and we had a great friendship going.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know, and I used to like to play a lot of golf, and I used to fish, and I quit hunting after the war was over. I went up to Colorado, and a fellow in the next camper got shot with a deer rifle about 100 yards from where I was standing. I told my cousin, who had been in the war, I said, well, I've dodged enough bullets, I ain't gonna dodge them out here. So I never did go hunting anymore. That's the end of my hunting career.
Yes, but you still do a little fishing, right?
Yes, I still love to go fishing.
Yes.
And I got 2 little doggies down there at the house, and they keep me going.
Do you still live in the same house on Willow Street that you moved into when you came into Grand Prairie?
Well, yes, I still live here on Willow Street. The first 2 years we were here, we bought a little place over on Rui.
Yes.
It's about 700 square feet, I think. I remember one Christmas, Helen's brother and his family, her and 3 children, come to spend 3 or 4 days with us. We had them stacked in there on the floor like hardwood. But we managed, and I've lived there now since 1957, 40 years at Willow Street.
Yes.
Grand Prairie has I've seen a lot of things come and go, and it's been a great challenge for me, and I was fortunate enough to be the president of the Rotary Club one year. And
great. Now let's talk about that.
One of my top things that I enjoyed doing. The only problem was the same year I was president of the Urban Renewal Association and traveled 10,000 miles that year, and that is one of our busiest years that we had in urban renewal. And when it was all over, I told my wife, I said, never again will I ever hold office. I felt like a balloon that had all the air let out when it was all over.
Especially holding down 2 presidencies at one time. That was tough.
And trying to do a job too, yes. It was, but it was all worthwhile.
All right. You've been president of the Urban Renewal Association. Was that for the state of Texas?
State of Texas.
For the whole state?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that's exciting. And did they send you all off on national conventions and things like that?
Well, of course, we went to some, but the association they didn't pay us any salary or any expense money. That come out of your own pocket.
You had to do that on your own.
I have one little story, if I have time to tell you. In Lakeview, one of the greatest feelings I ever had was helping this lady. She lived down close to the lake, and there was a bunch of shanties around there, and nearly everybody had their own little water well. It'd be 40 feet deep, but they might not be 20 feet from the outdoor privies that they had. It's 1,000 wonder we didn't have a typhoid epidemic down there. But anyway, I drove down in there one day, and we'd bought out all the places around her, and for some reason, her husband had got sent to a rest place. He was a quadruple amputee. So I told Ray, I said, Ray, come, let's go down there and look at this place. We got to do something with this. This little old lady is living there by herself, and she don't have any neighbors now. Has to haul water down there for drinking and cooking purposes. I said, we've got a house over on the 14th and Dickey there that we had used for an office. I said, we don't have to have that place anymore. We don't need it. And we own a lot over here on the Aggie Street. I said, why can't you go to Fort Worth and convince those people that she won't get enough money out of her property to pay for all of that, but if we can sell her this lot over there and or trade that lot for this one and take a little money and move his house over there and fix it up. Well, he got it worked out. We moved her, and she moved in there Thanksgiving Eve.
Yes.
And Mr. Prairie on our board got a hold of my young assistant, Mr. Young, and first thing I know, they went out there, him and some of the girls that worked our office, and put up some curtains and drapes and had some dishes and pots and pans. And Ray and I kicked in $50 a piece and went and bought a bunch of groceries and took them out there. And she got to bring them home for Thanksgiving.
How wonderful. Oh, that was just a real success story. Now, I want to ask you this. Was Dickey Road at that time what is now Marshall Street?
Yes.
That's what I thought, yes. So what is now Marshall Street formerly was Dickey Road, and we're taping this show now in 1997 on Dickey Road, which is far removed from Marshall.
They changed it from 8th Street on east. Now this, of course, it's still Dickey in here. Yeah. Yeah, that we changed up in the replanting and replotting all of the land down there for best land usage and all. We created a few new streets and cut off 1 or 2 old ones.
We have 1 minute left on our interview, so I want you to look out and just say what you'd like to in that 1 minute. Until I start doing this, this means you have to stop and tell us about your love affair with Grand Prairie, Texas.
Well, it's been a real challenge, and I worked with some great people, all of my board members and all. I always thought highly of them, and they were very cooperative, and they let us do the job. They didn't ever interfere. They set the policies, and Ray and I and Young, we tried to carry them out the very best we could, and it worked very well. And all the city managers I worked under, I never ever had a problem with them. And the mayors and all, I always tried to cooperate with all the people in the newspapers. I never did have any real problem with them. We'd get kind of crossways once in a while, but Elmer Davidson and I always worked it out. And so Grand Prairie's been good to me, and I feel like I've had a little something to do with Grand Prairie being a better city.
Well, I really want to thank you for this time we've spent. You took Mr. Jackson fishing. You've been good to so many people in Grand Prairie, Texas. We want to thank you for this interview, Mr. Ed.
My pleasure.
And when we end the show, they're going to show the wonderful plaque that was named in your honor down on 14th Street and Jefferson, and we're going to give that to the Keep Texas Beautiful, Keep Grand Prairie Beautiful, and ask them to reinstall it for you.
Well, thank you very kindly. That's very nice of you.
And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.
Thank you.